Alright, good morning. This video, hopefully short, is going through basics of writing up a lab, at least for my class. This works for pretty much all my classes. This main focus, though, is for my physics and chemistry. If you're physical science watching this, it's not that it's a bad video, but it's maybe the expectations a little bit higher than I would have for a freshman lab. Okay, freshman labs or physical science labs, a little bit less of the scientific process, more of just like, hey, we're experiencing data, like we're not just like talking about it, now we're actually seeing it and then analyzing it, right? For you physics students and chem students, it's a little more involved, right? It's more, how we do science, right? You're taking a lab-based science class. You're getting a science credit that you go to Iowa State, wherever you go for college. They say, oh, you took this class, you should have some knowledge of how to do a lab. Okay, so that's kind of the philosophy of this. So what I'll do is I'll run you through kind of what I look for. All right, and again, there's things I would love to add to this, but again, I got to keep it somewhat appropriate to grade level, right? I can't make it a college class. So hopefully this prepares you for college. Hopefully you're more prepared than most high school students. Okay. So I have here a little template, which is available on Canvas for you. The template is just kind of going through like what I want to see, right? You can think of this almost like a rubric, right? I got to take your score on your lab and convert it into a 4, a 3, a 2, or 1, right? It's a little hard to do that, but if you do all these things correctly, if your lab looks particularly nice, I don't see a reason why you couldn't get a 4, right? If everything's checked off, all these little, not say boxes, but all these little sections are all looking good, they're all checked off your to-do list, it's written well, it's got great graphs, right? I'd like to reward hard work, okay? But again, it's you'll see in a couple of seconds, that can be quite a lot. So getting a 3, I think if you follow the steps, do everything, should have no problem. Getting a 4, as you can imagine, a little more effort. So this template, just walking you through it, I'm not going to read everything, you can read it. You can pause this right now and read it, okay, it's on Canvas. But I'll just run you down what I'm looking for. Okay, so obviously beginning question, you got to put what you're trying to answer, right? Basically this is like a, hey, what were we trying to do? In a science paper, you would basically call this an abstract, which is like, hey, what were we trying to figure out and kind of like where were we going with it? Like what was our process and what did we figure? It's like a summary, okay? This first section here is basically that, okay? Basically, all right? Missing the conclusion, but that's a different thing. So beginning question, hey, what we're trying to figure out. Simple, write it down, easy. Hypothesis, okay? This is where like, okay, you chose to do something in a lab, right? I have you guys design your labs, right? I help you, of course. I don't just throw you to the wolves and say figure it out. But you picked something, right? You and your group picked, oh, we wanted to test this. Or we wanted to test it, but we tested it this way, or whatever, right? Very vague language, because this could apply to any lab we do, okay? The lab that I am going to use as an example, this is what's called an exemplar. This is for a density lab, right? So like if you add something to a liquid, does its density change, right? That's the beginning question. So that's right there, okay? You can see this is what I'm looking for. My template has it, and here's the exemplar showing it, okay? In your hypothesis, right, you decided, in this case, I decided to see, hey, does salt change the density more than, say, sugar, right? The hypothesis is basically saying that, hey, adding a solid to a liquid can change the density of the liquid, and then it goes further and basically implying that sugar does more, or I'm sorry, salt does more. Okay, so again, we kind of say, here's my proposed answer to the question. That's what a hypothesis is. And then I want you to identify the variables that you in your experiment were working with. Okay, so in my case, my independent was how much salt, how much sugar. That's what I changed. The dependent, of course, is how much density the water, how dense the water was, okay, as we changed the independent variable. And then the control variable, notice again, controls, plural. I'm not saying to list everything under the sun, but it should be the major things that you were trying to ensure you didn't change, right? So the temperature of the water, the amount of the water, you can read them right here, okay? So that's 2 of these down, right? Procedural process, this is where you're telling me what you did, okay, like what your lab was. This is, if I'm reading your lab, if I have never done this lab before and I read your lab, I should be able to do the lab. That's how detailed it's supposed to be, okay? So you can see here, I have my procedure written out. Notice again, I have nice headers, right? Nice little section titles, so it's easy to read, okay? And I'm giving specific instructions here, okay? So that like if I were to go in a lab right now, I could do these things And the assumption is if I do these things in order, do these things to the letter, I should get results comparable to yours, right? Assuming you do your lab correctly. Okay, so you can see here some examples, or rather an example of what it looks like. Okay, and again, hopefully you'd agree, oh, yeah, I can read that and understand that. Okay. As you work on your lab, right, you might, I tell you guys when you first start doing a lab, don't get hung up on every detail the procedure has to be written down, right? When you write up your lab, though, you better make sure those details are included. Okay, so when you're designing a lab, you might be like, do I want to do 2, 4, 6, 8? Do I want to do 5, 10, 15, 20? Right? When you're designing your lab, you might not have made your mind up yet. Okay, but when you write the lab up, you better have made your mind up. Right? It better have been, we went with 2, 4, 6, 8 in this case. Okay. What else we got here? Data collection and notes. This is, hey, you did the lab, and what were you collecting while doing it? It could be many things. A lot of times it's going to be data tables. And these data tables, you could make these in sheets and then just copy them over, right? I believe that's actually how I made these, if I recall, was I just copied these over from sheets. Okay, if you're like, how do I do that? I can always show you. It's not that hard. You just basically select the cells you want, right? In this case, all this. And then you hit Control-C and just paste it over in a Google Doc, okay? You can also make a data table in Docs. It's up to you, right? But because we use Sheets a lot, I would just do it in Sheets. Okay, so I got my nice data. Again, notice how organized it is. Notice how I have my units included, right? I mean, I hope you'd agree, oh, these are pretty organized. I can understand them pretty quickly, okay? Notes can be like, you know, certain things you might have written down. You might have been like, hey, when we were mixing this, it turned green. Hey, when we were mixing this, it started to glow. Hey, when we were mixing this, it started to bubble a little bit and then turn red. You know, I mean, it's what you might have said, hey, that's noteworthy. That's something I probably should include because maybe it matters. Okay? There's really no wrong answers here. Okay? But what I will say is try to avoid stuff like, it was cool. Try to avoid stuff like, it was interesting. It's not about your inclination, right? It's about, like, if I am doing this experiment, what might I look for? Okay? Or what are things you're like, it was surprising because when we did this, it all of a sudden got hot, or all of a sudden it got cold, or whatever. Okay? But it's not about, like, I liked it. It's not a review. Okay? Hope that makes sense. All right. The collection of data is just that. I have data. We're not analyzing it yet. Notice in here, nowhere does it says, we're right or we're wrong or anything like that. Okay? Analysis is where we start to do the real work. Okay, so if I go back to my exemplar here, or my template, you know, this is really, this and the conclusion are really the heart and soul of any lab. Okay? Because you take your data and say, what do I do with it now? What sense do I make of it? How do I propose to answer this question? Well, I wrote a hypothesis. I wrote an experiment. I ran the experiment. Now I'm like, is there validity to my hypothesis, or should I throw it out? Or am I kind of there but maybe missing certain things, right? So my exemplar, you can see my analysis here. I took those data tables and I graphed them. Okay, and again, notice the labeling. Notice, again, it's easy to read. It's scaled nicely. Please don't ever submit a lab where, like, this is, right, that looks horrible, right? You got to make sure it's an appropriate size, okay, as long as it's readable, right? I mean, I'm not going to pull a ruler out, right? I got to make sure that it's readable and that it's labeled correctly, okay? So notice I got in here this nice graph. I got my axes. I got a nice title. I got my equation. I got my R². That looks pretty good. Same thing with this other one. Looks pretty good. Okay, and then of course down here I'm starting to explain what I see. Okay, I know looking at these what it means, right? But maybe the person reading this needs a bit of a refresher. So what you do is you explain here what we're seeing. Okay, so you're explaining, hey, it would appear that as I increase the amount of sugar, the density does increase, right? Same thing with the salt. And then the question is, well, which one's more, right? I figure my cat's meowing in the background. But the point is that you're explaining your answers here. To get full points, you're not just saying, look, it goes up. You're explaining to me maybe the slope. You're explaining to me maybe how the R² imply that I have a really good linear fit in this case, right? An R² of 1 is perfection, okay? An R² of 0.995 is pretty near perfection, okay? So you're explaining to me these results look pretty valid. If your R² was 0.5, you might say, not really sure. And if you're saying, what is R²? Well, I'll have a video. I believe I posted on that. If you can't find it, let me know. But yeah, basically how good your fit is to the data. Okay. And this might take Notice this isn't a ton of writing. In this lab, it's pretty straightforward. There could be analysis sections that take 5, 10 pages. Okay, probably not in this class, but if you go to college, yeah, don't be surprised. Okay. Conclusion, basically you're summarizing everything. I'm not looking for, in lab, we did this. I don't need a summary of what you did. I need a summary of what your results show. Okay. And notice here, like I broke it up into sections. So like error discussion is its own section. Errors happen in every single lab. I don't care how good you are. I don't care how good your equipment is. I don't care how much time you took. Errors happen. Okay? It's not about blaming ourselves. We don't say, oh, please forgive me. That's not the point. The point is to identify them so if somebody else did the experiment, maybe they say, can I ameliorate? Can I mitigate? Nice ACT words. Those errors, right? And moreover, it's a way to be honest. You're like, hey, we have results, but there might be issues because, when we were measuring this, for whatever reason, we couldn't get an accurate measurement of that, or whatever, okay? There could be many, 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 many reasons there's errors, okay? And I just want you to make an honest effort at it. I am not looking for 7 million errors. I'm looking for the major ones that you've identified. Please do not waste time with stuff like, we're human, we make mistakes. Yes, that's always true, so don't mention it, right? Specific things to this lab, okay? Again, you can read this as an example if you want. And then in the true conclusion, right, you're basically telling me, hey, TLDR, too long didn't read, what are the major findings of your experiment? Okay, if I read this, I should be able to say, according to this beginning question, right, if we're considering this question, you're telling me, what is the answer? Basically, okay? And of course you're talking about your hypothesis in the sense of, well, we believe that adding salt would change the density. And it appears that we are correct, right? Here's why, okay? Your analysis already talked about the specifics, now you're giving me a general summary of it, okay? If you want to get really good grades on this, if you really want to show me your learning, you're not just saying, hey, it appears density goes up. You're then proposing why that's the case. And guess what? You could be wrong. It is possible, right? You're basically setting up another experiment. You're basically saying, so salt does appear to increase the density, so does sugar. I wonder why. So you might say something like, this proposes a new question of why does salt and sugar increase the density, right? And if you're like Carol, I have no idea. That's okay. You could just point out, hey, it proposes this new thing. We want to do research and figure out maybe why these two things increase density. If you have some idea, you're like, maybe it's because they both stick to each other. Like maybe there's something that's like sticky about salt and sugar. That's not the full answer, by the way. But you're like, oh, maybe it's that, right? You could say something like, maybe we could try another substance that's less sticky, right? Like put sand in water, right? Show me that you're thinking about where this goes next. Okay, your conclusion should basically leapfrog into another experiment. Are you going to run that experiment? We might sometimes, but a lot of times it's just kind of like a show me you're thinking about the scientific process, and show me you're thinking about how this never ends. We don't say, the answer's 7, and then move on. We say, why 7? Why not 8? Why not 9? Does it have to be odd? Could it be, you see what I'm getting at here? Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. Again, these are available to you. If you're writing a lab and you don't have everything, you could always start with, hey, let me type up the easy stuff, right? Let me type up the procedure, right? The data collection and notes, that all comes with doing the experiment. The analysis, I'll tell you, is probably the hardest part, okay? Analysis and conclusion are definitely the hardest parts of these, so don't be afraid to ask. But please don't ask, how do I do it? I'm going to refer you to this and say, read it again. If you say, I still don't get it, okay, I'll walk you through it. But please make sure you read it carefully to see some examples and hopefully make sense of your lab writing experience. Okay? So that'll, we'll call it quits there, and have a great rest of your day.